Welcome to Spirit of the Torah. I didn't know when I started this podcast that I would end up sharing so many teachings specifically from one teacher, Reb Noson or Reb Natan of Breslov, the great student and scribe of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. But that, at least for now, seems to be what is happening, and I'm very grateful to him for his teachings and the practices that emerge from them, and for this opportunity to share them with you. Without further ado, here's the teaching and the practice for this week's Parsha, Vayera, and as is often the case, to fully appreciate it, we're going to need a few background sources. So here are some of the background sources for understanding Vayera, which begins in chapter 18 of Bereshit of Genesis. And as always, all of these sources are going to be linked to in the show notes. You can find them all there. The first one is from the Talmud, from a Masechet, a tractate called Yoma, which deals with Yom Kippur. And actually, this is a story we're going to talk about, which is related to the scapegoat of Yom Kippur, which is called the goat for Azazel. And we have in the Talmud here a mention of two angels called Uzzah and Azael. And according to some of our rabbis, these two angels, they are the reason why that scapegoat for Azazel is called the goat of Azazel, that the names Uzzah and Azael are combined into Azazel. But who were these angels and why are they important? Well, for that we have to go to another Midrash, doesn't appear in the Talmud, does appear in a certain version in the Zohar. In the Zohar it says, when God wanted to make humanity, and we've seen a version of this conversation before in the Bereshit edition of this podcast, but it was different then, we'll see the difference. When God wanted to make humanity, the angels had all kinds of different opinions about this. And according to this version, in the Zohar, some of the angels said, come on, God, you're going to make people. Obviously, they're just going to sin. They're going to be immensely capable in terms of their infinite consciousness, but they're going to have a physical body and all the temptations of the flesh, to borrow a phrase, and of course they're going to abuse that. And Hashem, the Infinite One, replies in an amazing fashion to these angels. He has an incredible line. He says, you know what? If you were down there on earth and you had the ability to do all the things that they can do with their bodies, you would do the same things. You would mess up too. You would sin. You would abuse the flesh just as much as them. In other words, you, angels, are no better than people. So you're in no position to tell me not to make humanity because you're no better than them. And what happens is some of these angels accept God's challenge. They say, okay, you know what? We're going to go down there and see what happens. And Uzzah and Azael, or Uzzah and Azael, sometimes pronounced one way, sometimes the other. These two angels are two of the angels that go down to earth, and lo and behold, what happens? As soon as they get down and they have the ability to enjoy the pleasures of the flesh in an irresponsible way, they do so. So these two angels are a cautionary tale for us, but also for angels, that it's not so easy to be incarnated in a body down here on earth with all the complications and temptations that brings. And our next background source is also a very fun one because it's also about angels, and it's a version of the story about when Moses goes up to heaven to get the Torah. It's a story that appears in many forms, also in the Talmud and Shabbat there's a version of this. This one is from Shemot Rabbah, chapter 28, and Moses goes up to heaven, he's there to get the Torah, and of course, just like we have seen before humanity are created, the angels are basically jealous of people. We have free will, we have the ability to grow, we have the ability to serve in a way that they do not. So the angels say to God, don't give the Torah to this person, this human. Obviously, people are going to sin and mess up and not keep it properly and da-da-da-da-da. All the same kind of arguments we've seen before. And in fact, in this version of the story, and at this point in the story, it says, the ministering angels sought to harm Moses. So not only did they want to deny him the Torah, they resented the fact that he had ascended to heaven to get it. And they were saying, what is this person of flesh and blood doing up here? And they actually wanted to hurt Moses. Of course, this is all part of Hashem's plan. So what does the Infinite One do? He makes Moses' face appear similar to Abraham's. And then God turns to the angels and says, Aren't you ashamed in front of this person? This is Abraham, the one who you angels went down to earth, and he hosted you so nicely in his house. He did the mitzvah, the connection, the commandment of welcoming guests, and he gave you food. How can you stand here and say bad things about him and want to hurt him when he hosted you so beautifully? And that brings us to the opening of this week's Parsha, because that is a direct reference. The story we have, chapter 18 of Genesis, Abraham is communing with the divine. He looks up, he sees three figures, three people approaching him. He runs to meet them, he bows to them, he says, please, 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 come into my tent. Let me give you a little water, wash your feet, let me get you a little bread. He's desperate to do the mitzvah of welcoming guests, of hachnasat orchim. He's desperate to give. This is Abraham as the personification of chesed, of loving kindness, loving oneness, expansive flow. He just desperately needs to share in this way. And of course, he does a lot more than he says he will. He says he's just going to get them a little water and a morsel of bread. In fact, he prepares a lavish feast for them, and he himself does not partake of it. He stands over them, making sure they have everything they need and making sure they are fully sated. And that is all the more remarkable. The whole story is remarkable from the very beginning of him waiting for guests and running to them and bowing to them and giving them everything. If we consider he is 3 days after circumcising himself at the age of 99. And just to make it as extreme as possible, we're told in the tradition that the 3rd day is the most painful day. So here he is, very old, very frail, very much recovering from a very, very sensitive, painful procedure, and yet literally beside himself, running with incredible alacrity to fulfill this mitzvah of welcoming guests in this way. And now there's a lot of dramatic tension, because at first he certainly didn't realize that they were angels. In fact, it seems like he still doesn't when they are eating, because he is standing over them, watching them to make sure they have everything they need and to make sure they're sated, and they don't want to make him feel bad. The angels feel terrible, apparently, about the fact that eating does not come naturally to them. So the Midrash says that they did appear to be eating, that the morsels of food were disappearing one by one into them. Now, according to the beautiful teaching we're going to look at now from Reb Noson, there is a thread that ties all of this together, and here's what it is. Noson offers an amazing reading of all of these sources. He says that Abraham gave the angels food, knowing that they were angels, and stood over them, knowing that it wasn't very easy for them to eat, but basically forcing them to. If you've ever been in that situation where the host or hostess has given you something and saying, isn't it great? Don't you love it? And making sure you eat every last bit of it. That's what Abraham was doing, according to Reb Noson. Why? Why would he do such a thing? Doesn't seem very kind. Doesn't seem the way that a person of chesed, of kindness, would be acting. Well, the reason why he did it actually is to teach the angels a very important lesson. And in brief, that lesson is, it is hard to be a being of flesh and blood. It is hard to be a human being. And it's the same lesson, by the way, we learn from that first story about the angels who say, yeah, it's easy, we can do it. And as soon as they come down here and they're incarnated in some kind of body, they abuse the privilege of being incarnated in that way. And just the same, Abraham is teaching these angels, you know what? You're going to judge Moses when he comes to heaven to get the Torah. I want you to know, before you judge him, how hard it is to be a human being. And to know not only Moses, but all of us have to struggle so much. And why is eating the central point that conveys this difficulty? Well, Reb Noson says an amazing thing. He actually says, eating is the ultimate example of birur. And birur is a very, very important word in our spiritual text. What does it mean? It means sifting, selection, clarification, purification. In other words, separating out what we do want from what we don't want. What is he talking about? Well, this works on many levels. On one level, when we eat, we are bringing nourishing life force into our body that we need to sustain our lives. But we're also bringing waste product into our body that our body has to do birur on. Our body has to separate, filter, and dispose of separately. But also on another level, the Kabbalistic texts talk about eating as a very important act of birur in terms of our motivation. If we derive pleasure from eating, as we often do, who is that pleasure for? And what kind of pleasure is it? Is it a pleasure that is connected to the source of life, to the Ein Sof? Is it a pleasure that is connected to knowing where this food actually comes from? Is it a pleasure that appreciates our place in the universe in relation to the food we are taking in, and also to the waste product that it will necessarily cause, and appreciates that our body also, this physical body of ours, is also one day going to decompose and return to the ground, to the earth that it was taken from. Reb Noson points out the sin of the Garden of Eden, which begins the whole difficulty of human existence. Of course, the Kabbalists say it was all God's plan, God wanted it this way, we're supposed to have all these tests and challenges, but nonetheless, what starts it all off? It's an act of eating. But also in terms of the struggle of our eating in the right way, with the right awareness and the right motivation, and in terms of what happens in our bodies when we eat, this separation of nourishment from waste product on so many levels, eating is an act that defines how hard it is to be a human being. And so Abraham is feeding the angels and he's saying, you have got nothing to complain about human beings. You have got no case against us, because being down here in a body is really hard. And when Moses comes up to heaven to get the Torah, as the Midrash says, God is going to take Moses' face and change it, give him instant plastic surgery and make him look like Abraham, so that the angels get the point. So that the angels realize, whoa, you remember that time we were down there and Abraham made us eat by standing over us and we felt pressured into eating? You know how hard that was? Reb Noson says eating is so hard for the angels that they actually stumble and do not complete their tasks in the perfect way they're supposed to, and that they cannot return back up to heaven immediately till they've undergone a very long process of purification. And Reb Noson also says that Abraham is saying to the angels, you think that we shouldn't get the Torah because we have bodies of flesh and blood and we do things like eating, but actually what he's teaching them is, it's because we have those bodies and the challenges that come with them that we need it. Torah is actually made for us. And actually there's another version of the Midrash in the Talmud, in Shabbat, where Moses makes this point to the angels, where he says, obviously the Torah is meant for us. The Torah says, honor your parents. We have parents, you don't have parents. The Torah says, I'm the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. We were the ones who were slaves in Egypt, not you, and so on and so on. So the Torah is obviously meant for fallible beings like us who get things wrong all the time. And Reb Noson brings a beautiful verse from Psalms 119, where it says, were it not for this pleasure, this delight, this plaything that the Torah is for us, we actually could not endure. We actually need this beautiful, playful delight that is our relationship with the Torah. Otherwise, we cannot sustain our lives. The Midrash says also that when the people were in bitter, terrible, oppressive slavery in Mitzrayim, the place of narrowness in Egypt, they would delight themselves by playing with their Torah scrolls. That's what Torah is supposed to be for us. And Abraham is saying to the angels, we're the ones who need this, not you. It's meant for us. And I'm teaching you a lesson by reminding you what it means to be an embodied being, so that you realize it's not easy being human. And the final part of this teaching is, what happens to one of the angels? I mentioned before, Reb Noson says that the angels, because they eat, because Abraham is standing over them, forcing them to, the angels actually stumble on their mission partially, and they have to stick around down here for a long time before they can ascend back up to heaven, because they have been depurified, as it were, by this act of eating. One of them gets to go back in the time of Yaakov's day, but another one actually has to hang around all the way till the time of Samson the judge, Shimshon, which is many hundreds of years later. And what happens then is Manoach, who is Samson's father, Shimshon's father, he offers an angel some food. And the angel says, oh, no way. I've been on that trip before. This is again Reb Noson's reading of it based on earlier Kabbalistic sources. The angel says, no. I know how difficult it is, how terrible the effects of that are on me, and I really want to go back home soon. And indeed, the angel, after the angel refuses food, he ascends to heaven in a wondrous way. And this word for his wondrous ascent is actually crucial to the teaching and our practice. As it says in the verse about the angel's ascent, it says, Umafli la'asot. This wondrous thing was performed. This wondrous thing happened. Umafli la'asot. The root of the word umafli is pele. Pei lamed aleph means a wonder, a marvelous, astonishing thing. So we actually have that phrase umafli la'asot in a blessing, which we have the opportunity to say many times every day. And I know for many people, including myself, this is one of my favorite things in all of Jewish spiritual practice. It's a blessing we can say after we go to the bathroom and discharge some waste product from our body. And we say, thank you, God. Thank you, infinite source of life, that all the things in my body that need to open and close at the right time did so and do so. Because if they didn't, I couldn't even be standing here before you right now. We all know that's true from our own experience. We cannot function at all if our body's not working right. We all know what that means. And the blessing concludes, Baruch atah Hashem, rofei kol basar umefli la'asot. Blessed are you, eternal, infinite source of life, who heals all flesh and does wondrously, umafli la'asot. And that phrase, obviously directly quoted from the book of Judges, where the angel ascends to heaven. Reb Noson connects this all together and says, you see, the angel finally learnt the lesson. He learnt what a wonder it is that we eat, and nourishment stays in our body, but waste product goes out of the body. And that is not easy. It's not easy to be a being who goes through that process of birur, of selection, sifting, purification every time we eat on so many levels, internally, physically, psychologically, spiritually, everything. It is a great wonder. It is a peleg gadol to be a human being. And the angel finally got our lesson, and that's why the angel was finally ready to go back up to his heavenly home and to be an angel again. And we get to be down here. And according to this teaching from Reb Noson, the angels learned their lesson. And that's why when Moses went up to heaven to get the Torah, and God made Moses look like Abraham to teach the angels this lesson, they let Moses have the Torah in the end, because they realized, whoa, actually these beings of flesh and blood really do need it and really do deserve it. So there are actually multiple practices that come out of this teaching. I'm going to make some suggestions and see what you can integrate into your own life this week in a way that speaks to you. There's eating mindfully, eating with awareness of the nourishment. Where does that food come from? How did it grow? What elements of life went into it? How many people collaborated to take that raw life force and bring it into a form that you can consume? Very often the food we consume may have passed through the hands of hundreds of people working diligently to get to a form that we can actually enjoy and take into our bodies. And then there's the Kabbalistic practice I mentioned before of eating with the intention that the pleasure isn't only our pleasure, our egotistical, selfish pleasure, but actually eating with a pleasure that is also shared with the source of life. It is also a pleasure that is part of our relationship with the Infinite One. And finally, there's saying this beautiful blessing, the blessing is known as Asher Yatzar, because that's really how it starts. After we go to the bathroom, taking a moment and saying, thank you, infinite source of life, that my body works as well as it does, that I can discharge waste products that I need to, and that therefore I can stand before you and I can serve you as well as I can. I'll put some resources about that blessing in the show notes for you to enjoy. May it be a week of being gratefully, mindfully aware of what's going on in our bodies, of becoming more aware also of our motivations and our desires, and of knowing that they're all a part of our relationship with our Creator and with life. May it be so. Shabbat Shalom.
Tom.